Hey, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of your favorite cybersecurity podcast. I mean, it's my favorite cybersecurity podcast as well, not another demo. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Matt, what makes this episode so special? Well, here's the thing. I know we talk a lot about, how this industry can be a little bit formulaic and kind of repetitive and demos can be a little boring. Hey, it's the entire reason that this podcast exists. But there are some folks that are out there that are doing amazing work. And we wanted to talk about like what makes a good customer interaction, what actually makes a good demo. So I have with me Jonathan, Jesse, Bob Rabbitt, and Mark Elliott, and three of the best engineers out there in the game today. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how do we truly engage with our customers to ensure that they're understanding what our platform does and how it can, help their organization out. So with that, let's do this. Let's go. Jonathan, Bob, Mark, since that's how I have you on the screen here. So, JJ, I'll pass it over to you for a brief introduction and we'll get right into it.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. Jonathan, Jesse. I'm an SE at ZScaler. I've been here for a year or so. Previous to that, I was at another company doing SE work focused around network access control, and I was there for 7.5 years. And before that, did some consulting. So been doing this whole SE thing for a pretty long time. So excited to talk with you guys.
And Bob Rabbitt here. I'm a senior sales engineer with Concentric. I've been here about 6 months, but actually kind of very similar to Jonathan. Past history in both the SE world as well as the consultative world as well. So glad to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. My name is Mark Elliott. I've been in IoT, OT security, and medical as well for the last 10 years over several vendors. Prior to that, I was a wireless solutions architect and also a post-breach response engineer working in the federal space and enterprise space for Booz Allen Hamilton and Kudelski Security.
Awesome. Well, let's jump right into it. So I think the first topic that I want to talk about, if I harken back a few years, like pre-COVID years, we used to do a lot of meetings in person, right? That was a big thing. And so you had that kind of direct interaction with your customers. I think one of the things that's been that face-to-face interaction, I think one of the things that's been a challenge kind of post-COVID into this new Zoom, Teams, Google Meet era is that, we don't have that same kind of like human connection that you do if you're sitting in the room with someone. So whoever wants to jump in first, please do. But let's talk a little bit about like, what are some tips or tricks or thoughts on like, how do you keep the customer engaged so that they're not typing emails 5 minutes into your presentation?
I'll go first. So we all have our script, if we will, based on the vertical that we're talking to. We know the strengths of our product in their space. But even though I'm trying to emphasize and get through maybe 45-minute prezzo in an hour, I know that my sales rep's going to take 10 minutes of it on a slide deck that makes no difference to the client. I actually let them complain for 10, 15 minutes. Because what that allows me to do is to pinpoint the aspects of my features that I want to do specific to his pain points. So I say, okay, that's great. So I'm going to get into not my normal demo, but I'm going to specialize my demo to you. We're going to deal with problem 1, problem 2, problem 3, see how we relieve that, how we operationally utilize it to get into your workflow to help you do things better. And that's what I do. I try to get them to spill their beans first. So now I know where I can come in. I also will ask them what my competitors is doing for them to see if there is a differentiator there that I can push. But that's about it.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other things, and maybe this is also a little bit about behind the scenes for customers as well, is there's typically, at least what I've seen be successful as well, is having some type of call it discovery call or pre-call that the rep should have accomplished to help better prepare the conversation as well. So by the time that we're brought in, that's something else that I've seen helps engagement as well. If it's a no look pass, first time meeting, it happens. And then, to Mark's point, trying to generate that interest comes much more in the form of trying to poke the bear, as I like to say a little bit, right? Get some reaction, but also, if possible, coming in with some kind of predefined notion of what we're looking at is also important. So there's that. So more just an emphasis on what Mark had said. I think some other just call them tips and tricks is, video is some of this is just feels obvious, but it's not in a lot of cases. Is be willing to be the first on video, during the Zoom call, and sometimes call folks out. It's just like, hey, do you mind turning your video on? Because that will, while it's not a replacement for in person, you'll at least then, if they accept, have some visual cues as to whether someone's engaged or wandering off, those type of things as well. So that's something else that I've found is useful, is again just trying to maintain that visual contact.
I think the first two of knowing your like you guys talked a little bit about knowing the customer and either tailoring the demo to that customer or having that pre-call is key. I mean, I've sat through calls and demos just like our viewers have, where the person pitching them has not even been to the company website. Like, have some idea of what you do, right? Like, oh, it's Corewell, it's Perigo, it's Meyer, it's Spartan Nash, or for the West Michigan folks, right? Or some other company. Just go to their website and look at the bare minimum, but more importantly, have a lot of that discovery so you know exactly what's going on and what they're doing. I think that's key, like what Bob and Mark have called on. So hit us with your next one, Matt.
Yeah, well, I think it's like, so, okay, so here's what I'm thinking, and then maybe then I'll throw this next question at it because Mark kind of alluded to it. I think we all did a little bit there. I do think that like quick engagement, right? Getting them talking right away, asking them questions, all of that stuff, right? Because I feel like if I'm in a meeting and it just starts and I'm not myself personally, if I'm not engaged right away, it's very easy to drift off. Now, the 800-pound gorilla in that room, though, is that oftentimes we're starting with that 5 to 10 slide piece of it that may or may not be part of ours, right? We probably have to have a separate conversation about this with some account executives out there to get their take on it as well. But I guess knowing that most people are very immediately tired of slide share, and we can talk about that for hours, but like, what's your interaction with your account executives or your salespeople before these meetings to kind of ensure that it doesn't like drone on and we lose everybody by the time we get to the NASCAR slide? JJ, let's go in reverse order. I'll start with you.
I hate that NASCAR slide. Let's get rid of it.
Everybody hates that NASCAR. Nobody cares about that NASCAR.
Nobody cares.
I have asked dozens of people if they care about that NASCAR slide, and everyone is like, nope. So
that and company history. It's like, even coming from a startup, it's like nobody cares about your history. They really don't.
That's the other one. Yeah, we could just skip the. Okay, now I got to have a separate one with the account reps.
Can we skip the net promoter score conversation as well, because nobody cares about that as well.
Yeah.
But I forgot the question.
Like, what is your interaction with, I mean, versus just like showing up for the meeting and, hey, the rep's going to do his part and I'm going to do my part. Like, what do you do to prepare, before these meetings, or how do you gauge the interaction? Do you sense when maybe the slides are dragging on a little bit and you jump in, or stuff like that?
So, the account reps that I've worked with both here at Zscaler and in the past, we've partnered for a long time together. It's been a pretty stable. So we start to develop that flow pretty quickly. We always joke about having the meeting before the meeting and then the meeting after the meeting, right? You have to have a pre-meeting, you have to have a post-mortem, and then of course, obviously the meeting. But like, what does the account manager, what has he or she done from a research point of view about that customer? Like, why is Matt taking this call? Like, Like you clearly launched some form of email blitz or some form of targeted call into Matt, and there was some keyword that Matt heard, right? That wanted him to learn more about the product. Like that's what I need to know because that's what I'm gonna key in on, hone on from my presentation point of view. So understanding why you're taking this call is the first thing that we need to address in our pre-meeting, and then make sure you nail that right out of the park.
They actually connected with me at a CSA event because that's where all the very best connections happen. So that's where that came from. And then I was totally willing to take a meeting after that. Bob, I guess we'll pass it over to you.
Yeah. So I think the other thing is in addition to understanding some of the details around the opportunity, right? What is the interest level? What is it we're talking about? So again, we can be more targeted and focused, and we're not just doing a harbor tour, which I think we all kind of hate, right? Is just doing a harbor tour of all the features. The other thing I found valuable is just talking through the flow of the presentation itself, and eventually, depending on the structure of the sales team, if you're, as SEs, if you're supporting just a few dedicated reps, you eventually get into a flow, and you have to do less of this up front, but being clear together on what that flow is going to look like, right? What is it you're going to cover? I a lot of times will review the slide deck with the rep again as part of that pre-call, and I'll just tell them straight up, skip that NASCAR slide, skip this slide, and it's a discussion. I'm not, nobody's in control per se. It's just like based on what I'm hearing, let's skip these three things. Let's show one or two components, talk to that, and then jump in. And so for me, it's that coordination of who's going to say what. And for the most part, that's how it turns out if we've had the conversation. If we haven't had the conversation, it can go anywhere. So
Yep. Mark, what's your interaction like with your customer or your account executives?
Yeah, so I might be unique. I support 4 sales reps across the country. So what I rely on them for is their internetworking skills. They have sold to either someone in this company from when they were at a previous company. So they're doing their networking behind the scene prior to the call to try and at least give us a little feedback. So every morning, like today, I called all my sales reps and say, okay, I'm looking at our calendar. This is what we have today. How are we going to approach this? What am I going to do? Just a quick, maybe 2-minute on each account of where we're going to try and drill and what he may have found out about the account prior, right? And then we have our text phones left open during the call. And I have the TDC, they don't care, where I've already written it out and I just have to hit send, right? So that the sales rep knows, okay, let's get to hey, you know what? I think this would be better if we let Mark show you in the demo. Oh, okay, let's go, because just like when I'm presenting, I require my sales rep to take notes, because usually I'm too involved answering questions and showing it in the portal to take notes. Oh, they're interested in Microsoft DHCP versus Infoblox, right? Whatever it is for like the integrations. So I have him take the notes, and that's his responsibility while I'm presenting. And then I take notes of how, again, we try to get them on camera so we can see if any of them react to anything that's presented, right? Because now I have at least a visual cue that this might be an area that either they've dealt with or they need to deal with. And that's about it. But the prep, and then we do a post meeting to figure out who's got next steps. Maybe I need to do an RFP for them, or maybe a security assessment or something like that. So we get the next steps defined.
Yeah.
I was just going to say one of the not only, but the best use of AI that I have found is like these Zoom meeting notes, where they recap things automatically for you. I think Teams does the same thing, right? Like anytime someone says, Jonathan is going to do this, or it also frees me up from not having to take notes and demo, as Mark was saying. The account manager, he or she should be taking notes while I'm demoing, but then also that follow-up from Teams or Zoom in the AI summary. Like, I know a lot of people are anti-AI, but like that's That's
No, we use
freed
that
up
too.
my
We use that too.
brain. Yeah, you guys use that too, Mark. Yeah, I love it. It's freed up my brain to focus on the demo and not on, oh crap, they said something that I got to write down.
We use the AE to augment it. So where it's taking notes, he'll write, they got excited here, right?
Ah.
That's sort of to put the emphasis on the meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, I love all of that. I would say I'll throw in from like the partner perspective. I also think a bit of a pre-meeting is important because a lot of times, like if you're coming in as the vendor, it's to a company that we already have a relationship with on the partner side. And so we should be able to give you, I know I personally always try to of like, because I have a couple of customers as like, they don't want slides, so I think that in partnership between the vendor and the partner is also important in that we should be feeding you guys information about these customers and at least know a little bit of like the pain points, the personalities, who you're talking to and things like that as well. So I think all of that put together should really set people up for doing, a good presentation. Let's talk a little bit about, I think one of the challenges that I see sometimes is, maybe in a demo meeting, you've got like the technical person that will be hands-on with the software. And then maybe you've got like a manager or some other kind of ancillary person that's sitting in there. And so the conversation has to balance between like technical and business. And how do you navigate or understand like what level of depth should this conversation go to? Because I have seen instances where people like they kind of go down a technology rabbit hole and that, I think people kind of trail off. So talk a little bit about the balance of like talking about the problems and the solutions versus knowing how deep to dive into the technology. Bob, let's start with you. I don't think you've started one yet. So
yeah, no, so very very relevant, happens all the time, right? This is a question we deal with constantly. So first part is, again, the reason we talked about having these pre-calls and knowing the customer first is so we know who the audience is, right? So we know who we're talking to. Is it a mix? Is it purely technical? Is it purely business? Once we have that figured out, assuming there is a mix, which happens quite frequently, there's a couple of things to do. Part of this component also depends on what stage you're at in the process as well. If this is your first interaction, right, prior, post maybe some initial discovery, but this is kind of your first, your first show, I'm not going to get super technical. Again, unless there's somebody that's extraordinarily deep and it's just a focus for them, I'm just going to purposely not go extremely technical. I'm going to focus on just enough, but err on the side of business value and what problems this is solving for the organization versus let me show you this widget, right? That's over here. It's a hard problem to solve, especially for someone like myself where I like to go look at all the widgets. So that's where, again, I think, Mark, to your point, having that open Slack channel or what have you with the rep as well, they can kick you back the other way is like, Bob, you're rat holing, stop. So that's kind of my take.
Yeah, I like that. Mark?
I generally, as a rule, over half my meetings are mixed, high-low technology. Because we do a lot of medical, we'll have the biomedical guys, and then we'll have the network security guys on the same call. And I don't want to say it's adversarial, but it is. They are two groups that fight for funds within the organization, a fight for staffing, and so on. So I can't go too deep on one end because I'll lose the biomed guys. I can't go too shallow or I'll lose the network guys. So I prefer to tell a story. Rather than going over features, I explain, hey, where do you stand on your vulnerabilities? Do you know? Do you even know your inventory? Let's talk about, there's been a hospital I've been working with in the last few months, and these will all be true stories. And this is what we saw. First off, I would say I would admonish the network security bigots right from the very beginning, because I'll say, guys, if the biomed aren't securing the published vulnerabilities on your devices, you can do everything you want with the network. They can stay layer 2 and you can be exploited that way. So you need to be able to work with the biomed guys, making sure they're doing their stuff. And the biomed guys are going to reach back to you to say, hey, listen, I need RDP blocked for these devices because there's a known vulnerability based on that. And maybe it's a critical 0-day event, like a log4j or something. So you have to have a story that compels both people to listen. And that's what I do. I basically tell a story of how a hospital was in trouble or how a manufacturer was in trouble and how they managed to pull together as a team and get it out. But I always try to emphasize that the low end and the high end work as a team to deal with the issue. And that's how I tend to keep them a little bit more from me going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yep. I like that. JJ, like in your space, a lot of times those are very like business changing conversations that you're having, right? A completely different way to do something. So I'm sure you run into scenarios where you have a very mixed bag of folks that are on these meetings. I guess talk about your process there.
So Mark, who fights more, network versus security or biomed versus network? Like, which team hates each other more, right?
Network are the most pompous, pious. The biomed guys just came off the fertilizer truck, and yeah. Mind you, those people have degrees in physiology and electrical engineering, but according to the network guys, they're
yeah. I love the network guys.
My quick take on network guys. They used to be the security team, right? And then that got kind of taken away from them, and now they're kind of getting pulled back in. I think, boy, there's a whole episode there on like why there's some salty network folks out there. But yes, I've met a few.
Yeah. So I think back to your question, and by the way, I describe my job as hosting meetings for the network team and the security team to talk. That's what I do for a living.
You're an enabler, basically.
Yeah. But I think back to your question, right, on transformation, changing your network, doing things a little bit differently, which is what we preach here at ZScaler. It still goes back to what Mark was saying about stories. It's still a story of how we can provide business value and solve problems. And one of the challenges, as I mentioned, I've been here for a year. One of the challenges is getting those stories and being able to borrow stories from coworkers that you've heard. There was a lady, she was the head of engineering, sales engineering at my previous role, and Ellen was the master at borrowing your story and telling it in a way that, made it like hers. And so developing your stories and your use cases is still the key to selling. Like as Bob said, I'm not going to sell widgets. I'm not going to sell dials and knobs and levers. I'm going to sell how we can help you solve things and then use customers that either I've worked with directly or I've learned the story of a coworker very well to share that story to say, okay, this is why we want to transform your organization, your world, into a different way, or in Mark's or Bob's case, right? Why we want to sell you or change what you're doing for our product set. And that story's got to be believable. It's not like, I listened to an account executive be like, oh yeah, we our product protected the space shuttle. And it was like, dude, the last space shuttle flew like before our company was even started, right? Like, now, NASA used the product, so in his brain, apparently, he went NASA space shuttle. We kept the space shuttle safe. But keep those stories believable, keep them applicable as well. So if I'm talking to a manufacturing company, I'm not telling a financial services story.
Right.
So another area that I sometimes see presentations go awry is when the questions come up about competitors. So I think there are ways to differentiate yourself from your competitors without like attacking your competitors or talking negatively about them. A lot of times, those of us that have been in the industry for a while, maybe we've worked for some of our current competitors before. So talk a little bit, Mark, let's start with you. Navigate your way through talking about your competition or how you set yourself apart from your competition without, because no one ever wants to hear the negatives, like bashing your competitors, right? So talk through that a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm guilty of that. I have worked for 4 IoT, medical IoT security firms in the last 10 years. So I emphasize, I say I've worked for other vendors in this space. I respect all my colleagues from those places. I'm not going to say anything bad about their product. What I will do is show you the differentiation, what they do versus what we do. If you have any specific questions, because a lot of times we're competing against the existing legacy competitor, right? I said, more than happy to show you the differentials. You know, I don't run and say, oh, do you know they cheat by scanning, by decrypting the infusion pump packets illegally, even though there's a desist order? You don't have to say that. What you say is we have other ways around to getting that information without worrying about the decryption of that encapsulation. So again, I always say, I'm not going to say anything bad about them, but I will tell you how we're different. And then that starts the conversations. And 90% of, I would say, maybe almost half of my calls, I am against a competitor, either legacy in the house or competing for RFP. So in those cases, they respect that, because I assure you there are some other competitors that go hardcore negative, right?
Yeah.
And the funny thing is it wouldn't be bad if it was truthful, but a lot of it is just, much like your space shuttle, it sounds good, but it wasn't a real thing, know. So yeah, but that's how I do it. I just say, look, I'm not going to say anything bad about the product. I'm just going to tell you how we're different, and then you can decide if that's better or not.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I typically, I actually lead. Whether they ask for it or not, I just come out and just say, one of the things I'm hoping to do today is just help you understand how we're different and frame it in those, because you frame it in that conversation, they appreciate it. You don't have to get into, nitpicking, which is never good. It's not a good look for anybody.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's been my main focus. Is I'm not, if you want to ask about a specific vendor, fair enough. But really, this is more like what makes us unique versus anybody else, or even versus other specific folks. The other thing that I've seen was interesting that's related is RFIs and RFPs that I think we all kind of deal with. I got one the other day, and it feels like it's starting to become a trend a little bit, where I think part of it was their internal metrics. I don't know if it was necessarily something we were supposed to respond to, but one of the questions was effectively, is this company horrible to work with? Effectively, right? Or do the are the reps super pushy? Are they, are they aggressive? Are they, negative? That was kind of the tone of the question as part of their RFP. And so they were making it really, really clear as a customer, is like, we're not looking for the, that type of interaction to begin with. So
I think
yeah. Sales teams matter, right? JJ, you've got some pretty big competition in your space. What's your take on talking about them?
Back to what Bob and Mark said, right? I'm not the only person in my space. ZScaler's got some real big competition, right? And also, I never used their product. First of all, I'm just kind of know from my internal competitive team, and how am I sure that the internal competitive team is like the most up to date as well, right? Like, what happens if a new version comes out, right? And so now I'm blasting in and saying, oh, well, you only do, 0.75%, and the new version does, 0.8, or I don't know. I'm just making up things, right?
Yep.
And now I look like an idiot by saying that, their program is garbage because it only does 0.75. I don't know. So I try to be careful with that. And I know that, like, there's probably going to be 3 vendors, right? Like, no matter what. I was just telling this story the other day. At our old house, we put new windows in, and that's an expensive purchase, right? To put in brand new windows to your house. And so one of the vendors actually provided us with like this checklist of, here's everything we do. I know you're going to have 2 other vendors. Go fill this out, right? I know that as the vendor, there's going to be at least one other person. Nothing's just single source. It's always a bake-off. It's always a competition, whether that's the incumbent or new vendors. And so here's why I believe I am better, and I don't want to be negative towards the other person. Here in West Michigan, it's a small community of security people as well. And so if I am a terrible bash people up, right? I'm going to come across my friends, my coworkers, former coworkers, future customers, former customers, right? All of that stuff. We're going to go to GrrCon and it's going to be homecoming week. We're going to go out to CloudCon and it's homecoming week, right? We all know everybody. So that's why you kind of got to be careful how you sell and how you talk. And we've all sat through that terrible, terrible demo or terrible account executive who's just slammed the competition, and you can literally see the customer crossing the vendor off, like on their face and their mannerisms. So.
Yeah, I've seen that so many times actually, and I think a couple of you mentioned like I think if you get into that like feature for feature comparison thing, that's a huge rabbit hole to not go down because again, I think people are buying from companies that they trust and believe in and think that they can work with, right? So I think sometimes we get into this like every little last feature that we have versus they have, and I don't know that that's always the right way.
As you mentioned, the point is, the conversation we're having today is engage. How do we keep customers engaged as well? And I think that's part of it. Is if we're focusing on solving the problem, right, in our unique aspect, and I think there's a confidence aspect there as well. Is you don't have to be you don't have to be apologetic either, right? You can go too far the other way, right? And then you sound kind of not confident in your solution. Be confident about what you can do, but focusing on solving their problem and what makes you the best, because ultimately it's their decision anyways, right? So it's really just, I'm here to enable you, do the best I can, but you're going to make that decision, right? And I don't need to interject this weird personal vendetta, if you will, against another company. Just
I think that's a great point.
Okay. One thing I'd like to add is going back to like the story, telling a story. If there is a great differential that you want to emphasize, all you have to do is say, for example, we're all good at building inventory. We're all good at finding the vulnerabilities out of the CVEs. But other than telling you you've walked into a minefield, are you being walked out of the minefield? Right? You need someone who's had approved remediation steps that are going to optimize those efforts to get you out of there, rather than just saying you're in trouble and good luck. And that's all I have to say. I don't have to go super negative. I'm just going to say, again, one of the differentiators is we're going to walk you out. We're going to help you get out of trouble. And that's where you don't have to be super negative.
Yeah. I like that. So sales engineers by our nature, right? We're technical. We are often referred to as the smart person in the room. Whatever other things the account execs do to build us up, probably beyond our capabilities, because sometimes we run into questions we don't know the answer to. And in the middle of a demo, when you're supposed to be the smart guy in the room and you get hit with something you don't know the answer to, that can create some awkward moments in demo presentations as well. So JJ, let's go right back to you. Talk a little bit about like, how do you handle the, oh crap, I don't know the answer to that question when a customer asks it?
Don't lie. Like that's the best advice I can give another SE or whatever we call ourselves, systems engineer, sales engineer, systems architect, whatever, right? The smart guy in the room. Because if you lie, you're going to get caught. It's just it. I don't know. And let me follow up with you on that. And then following up, those are it's very simple. Matt, I don't know the answer, but you know what? I work with a bunch of smart people. I'm sure they've come across this problem in the past. Let me get back to you. And then usually I'll send you an email. Hey, Matt, we talked about, did I capture the problem correctly? And you're like, no, you messed up. It was like this. And then we have that dialogue and we start building that trust and that relationship and the understanding around things instead of, well, actually, yes, this works. And then that, cool. Well, I'm going to buy your product for this use case. And then it doesn't solve that use case. Or I make decisions based on this answer and you told me incorrectly. So don't lie, say I don't know, and follow up.
Yep. Totally agree.
Yeah, and I think there's not much to add there, really. I think in a lot of ways, it's being honest about your limitations. Everybody knows, right? No, other than that, every once in a while you get somebody combative, right, that really wants to stump the chump. But
Stump the
in the
chump guy.
main,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
in the main, they know who you know, they know you're a human being, and you're not going to know every little nitty gritty detail per se. There's a ditch on the other side though that I've seen, and this is kind of more for newer SEs, or if you're new to the organization, is you have that's your answer too often is, I don't know, let me get back to you. So there is a ditch there, but again, a lot of that comes back to the preparation. Everything we've talked to, if you can, in the main, understand what the use cases are, how to navigate that, you're going to be fine, typically, and that's the best way really to handle it.
Our biggest one is integrations. They'll pull up an integration they want to do with your product that you never even heard of.
Right.
And and it probably cost $75 a year license fee because it's some college kid's project that they're doing, right? So what I do is the exact same as you guys, but I always I will have that on your desk by tomorrow morning. I will have an answer to that by tomorrow morning. And we have a direct hotline to our CEO and CTO where we get an immediate response. So if we have a question like that, which is great, that is one of the great things about the company I'm working for, to go up through, I don't have to go through anyone to get to the CTO. I can go right to them and they can explain and where it's going to be on the roadmap, right? We're looking at that at Q3 type of thing.
Yeah.
I think that's
also,
the key, to have that time frame, right, Mark? I might not know the answer by tomorrow, but guess what? You'll have a follow-up from me by tomorrow. Like,
exactly.
Hey, so-and-so is out of the office. He or she is the guru behind this. And so you'll know a better answer by.
Yep. So you set the expectation and they're not sitting there every day saying, oh, they don't know what they're doing. The other thing we do that I think is important is that trusted consultant that you just talked about, right? So we'll be doing a demo, let's say, and we find out that there's a bunch of devices that are susceptible to IPv6 because of the multicast broadcast. It's an older Windows 7 device that was around before multicast broadcast was even invented, right? So you can say things like, oh, by the way, when you secure those devices, make sure you shut IPv6 off on the device and on its NIC, because the NIC will advertise the IPv6 even if you shut it off on the device. And it's just little things like that that builds a trust. Oh, he knows what he's talking about with their infrastructure. And again, it's not your responsibility. You could have let them struggle in the wind dealing with it. But by coming forth and offering that up, they begin to trust that you actually know what you're talking about.
So to that point, I think that's a perfect answer there. One final question, and maybe Mark, we'll go right back to you, and is for sales engineers, maybe there's some new ones out there, or people that are looking to get into this space. What is a piece of advice, maybe beyond what you just said, because that encapsulated it really well. Let's say there's some new sales engineers that are out there. Give them one piece of advice that you wish you knew when you were getting started in this industry.
Don't talk like you have Tourette's. Don't just be throwing technical terms out, thinking that they're going to put that together in a puzzle for you. You need to be able to talk about the technology like we're having a casual conversation. That for a young person is probably the hardest thing to do, to not hamper on technical words to show that you have, some sort of skill set. Again, not necessarily a story, but you should be able to talk about this like you would to someone who knew nothing about the technology. Yeah, hey, we do this because of that sort of thing.
Yep. I love
By the
that.
way, my daughter is trying to become a sales engineer at this point. She's giving up on her lifelong career working at Disney and decided she wants to make real money and not play with.
It's a bit of a Mickey Mouse racket sometimes, not gonna lie. So
I'll tell you what,
it's a good
Mickey Mouse has
transition.
a great cybersecurity team if you can get on it. That was my recommendation.
Right. Yeah.
Bob, what's your
think,
one piece of advice for all those aspiring engineers out there?
I think I would probably echo Mark's sentiment, and just continue to focus it down on telling the story. Right, figure out how to tell a story. That's kind of the simplest way I can do it, is or make that practical, is figure out how to tell a story. And a story does not have to be, I worked with customer X. A story could be, thinking about what it is you're trying to demonstrate and put yourself in the shoes of the individual who might be utilizing this or benefiting from what it is you're talking about, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So, if I'm demonstrating a feature that's for a level 1 incident responder, do some research, use all the GPTs out there and all of that. You can do plenty of research and just figure out kind of what that day in the life looks like, so that you can talk through that, even if it's not, as I mentioned earlier, if you don't have a direct customer interaction. Fair enough. Just focus on the role and what it is they're trying to accomplish as best you know, and talk to that process versus, again, click widget X. Look at drop down Y.
Yep. Good stuff. JJ, bring us home with your words of wisdom.
Learn to listen. And I had a head of sales said, Jonathan, you know the technology very, very well. And as we were role playing, like, I could tell when you wanted to interject, because you physically, like, you leaned in, like, you're like, oh, I got to get this point across. And so I would lean in and start to interrupt. But there was actually a deeper problem he was trying to describe as part of this role play that I kept missing because I wasn't listening, right? As a customer, you have a problem that you would like to solve. As a vendor, I have a solution. I don't know, SSL inspection, right? We're great at it. But there's actually an underlying problem, like a deeper problem, that if you really listen to and hear what the customer is saying, you can solve what he or she really cares about, which is deeper than I have maybe a technology issue, or I need this one person or this one thing solved. So learn to listen. And then, the other part of that is, and I'm going to give two pieces of advice, is be okay with awkward silence. I'm terrible at that. But let the silence sit for a little bit. And see what happens because of that.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Well, guys, I learned something today. I learned that the sales engineering role is one of the most challenging roles out there, because you have to be part sales, you have to be part engineer, you have to be part personality, you have to be part smart. That's a super challenging thing. The ones that do it well are magicians and rock stars. For those of you that are either getting into it or maybe struggling with where you're at in that space, I hope you learned a lot today. Please like and subscribe to all of that fun YouTube and social media stuff. And thanks, guys. This was brilliant. And we'll see everybody for the next episode.